What's going on, everybody? This is Steve from Bloom Audio. Now, I spend a lot of my day listening to music using some of the best audiophile digital audio players in the world. Today, we're going to start our series on the best digital audio players by asking the question, what's the best DAP for me under $1,000? And to help answer that, we're going to look at the Ibasso DX180, the Cayenne N3 Ultra, the Fio M23, and the Astel & Kern SR35. We're going to talk about the sound, some of the key features, the performance, and other things that set these apart from each other. We're going to start with the build and design. Now, in general, digital audio players typically land somewhere between an iPod Classic and basically just a smartphone. Most of these players lean more towards that smartphone type design. In fact, all these players technically use Android, and 2 of the 4, if you're looking at the home screen, it pretty much is indistinguishable from your average smartphone. So if you're looking at the DX180 from Ibasso, it's got a 5-inch 1080p screen, but unlike a phone, it's a little bit thicker, has some things like that hardware volume scroll wheel, play, pause, skip buttons on the side, and it actually has an SD card slot, which is getting harder and harder to find in smartphones. DX180 comes in a bunch of color options. It has some nice accents to the style, but it's basically a kind of simple, very well done execution of just a functional design. N3 Ultra has a similar general design. The materials feel like a step up. The black chassis with the copper accents does have a smaller screen, which makes sense when we learn a little bit more about the function of the device in just a minute. Overall, it's a really nice looking and feeling device as well. Now, the Fio M23 actually really impressed me out of the box. It's got a bigger screen, 5.5 inches, and it's got a few more buttons and knobs and stuff on the side. The one thing that's really cool that stood out is for fine-tuning the volume, it's actually like a slide touch control with your finger rather than a button. So you have the hard button to press to do that and the slide. It's just the little things when you handle 10 DAPs in a day and one of them has something cool that makes it stand out among the crowd. And of course, there's the Astel & Kern SR35, which is bound to be pretty divisive in this build and design category. The material quality is excellent. The knobs and buttons all feel great on it. It's very small. The screen's only 3.6 inches, and it has this sort of slanted design, which according to Astel & Kern is designed to help feel more natural in your hand with a small screen. I'm not entirely sure about that, but that's become somewhat of a love it or hate it design decision. In terms of battery life, any of these devices will probably get you multiple days of standby time, but for playback, the estimate is about 10 hours for just about all of them, except for the SR35, which gets an estimated 20 hours of playback time. Now, that playback time, obviously you're taking into account that there's some more high-powered audiophile hardware under the hood in terms of the DAC chips and the amp design than you're getting in your typical phone, which is going to greatly impact the battery life there. And I wouldn't expect to get that full 10 or 20 hours because those estimates are based on using files on an SD card or on the player hard drive, CD quality at medium or low gain, 50 volume, something like that. So if you're using something that's harder to drive, you need to turn the gain up to high, or even just using a higher bitrate file. All of those things are going to have a negative impact on your battery life. In terms of the power output for each one, they're all around the same, give or take a few milliwatts. They're all about 1 watt at 32 ohm output, which means you're going to drive pretty good range of efficient headphones really well. You'll be able to use those with these, but a lot of really hard to drive planar magnetic headphones aren't going to sound great, or they're just not going to be able to get the volume without clipping. For IEMs, again, tested a bunch of IEMs with all of these. They're generally really solid with even those very low impedance, high sensitivity IEMs, like stuff like the Campfire Fathom. I would say the Astel & Kern SR35 has the edge here, where pretty much didn't detect any noise no matter what I plugged into it. Where the Fathom could sometimes be a mixed bag in like the DX180 or with the M23. So in terms of just that basic device form factor, there's generally similar. The M23 is slightly larger with that 5.5 inch screen. The SR35 is smaller than the rest of the lot. It's going to fit in your pocket easier and has that improved battery life. So what about the features and UI? In terms of the features, there's essentially 3 different categories being represented here. Ibasso DX180 and FIO M23 are Android-based apps using an up-to-date version of Android OS. They let you download the Google Play Store, download and play any app you want on there, games, video streaming, music streaming. It's essentially an open Android device that just happens to have all of this audiophile hardware under the hood. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got that Cayenne N3 Ultra. N3 Ultra is a pure player. It has no apps except for the configuration and the music player. You can't install any additional apps on there or use it for anything else essentially other than playing music. The N3 Ultra is also the only device in here that doesn't have any internal storage that you can use for music. The internal storage basically is for the firmware and all of that. You'll need to get a micro SD card to load music onto the device. And the Astel & Kern SR35 sort of splits the difference here. It's using a custom version of Android that opens you up directly into the player with assuming you have your own digital files stored on the device or on an SD card, and you can browse your library like that. But it also has the ability to install a curated selection of apps from Astel & Kern. So, Spotify, Qobuz, Apple Music, Tidal, most of the big ones are all on there. But the design is still very much focused on the player and music library portion of it, not really on the apps. So in terms of the device usability, if you're looking for something to use as a pure player, I think the Astel & Kern, their new Crimson UI, is among the best. It's a really nice experience, very well designed for organizing content, looking things up, searching. I didn't really have much trouble syncing things like my album covers as well. So that's a really solid experience. N3 Ultra is solid as well, and might be a little snappier at times than the SR35, which is pretty fast, but you still have a little bit more of that OS bloat than the N3 Ultra has, making it N3 Ultra a little bit faster as a pure player. Now you can still use the DX180 or the M23 as just a player, ignore all of the apps. Both of those players has a player pre-installed on the device. That's their own system and has additional features, and you can configure all of that. And they're both really solid to use as a pure player as well. You can even kind of rearrange your Android screen, put a widget there, and just roll straight from the get-go with the player. But in terms of that functionality, again, I would probably prefer the SR35 if I were going that route. One thing I really liked on the M23 that also gets a little bit of these best of both worlds sort of design is FIO has their own app on there that lets you, just like the Astel & Kern, download a curated selection of music streaming apps. Now, what's cool about this is you don't have to log in to anything or install any kind of app store to do this. So if you don't want to log into the Google Play Store on your digital audio player, or you also don't want to install, one of these APK Pure or other app store alternatives that may or may not actually just be spyware, you don't have to do that on the FIO. It makes it really simple to install things. A key feature that all these devices have is the ability to function as a DAC amp. You basically shut off the player portion and plug it into another device, a computer, a phone, or whatever else, and get the DAC portion of it without the player portion. I think this is especially important for the N3 Ultra because it doesn't have any apps. It actually ends up working really well as just a DAC amp. You can plug it into your phone with an OTG cable. You can get the sound, you can get the features. N3 Ultra has, the tube mode, the solid state mode, and it just honestly sounds amazing, which we'll talk about in a second. So that's a really cool option there. One thing N3 Ultra is missing here is the Bluetooth option. The DX180, FIO M23, and Ashland Current SR35 can all also operate as a Bluetooth DAC amp, and they can go both ways and transmit to Bluetooth as well to use them with Bluetooth headphones. So you have a lot of options there in terms of how you're listening, whether that's wired or wireless, with the 3 out of the 4, and the N3 Ultra only gives you the wired options. And that DAC amp mode ends up being a really cool way to evaluate what's at the root of all this, and that's the sound. The sound is obviously the most subjective part of this conversation. There are some differences both in terms of the technical capabilities and in the tuning of what each designer is providing, from the digital processing element to the DACs to their preamp and amp design, that do make some difference in the final sound output that you hear. In terms of the raw technical quality of that sound, the level of detail presented, the sense of separation in the imaging, the feeling of, black background and low noise floor, the Cayenne N3 Ultra is the winner. It feels just like a step above, like it's in the next class up of players. And of this group, it gives you the widest range of sounds with the option to use the tube solid state modes on there. Otherwise, from a technical perspective, the SR35 may have a small edge, I think, in the imaging, but otherwise this feels like a pretty even comparison, where the differences more come down to the tuning and preference than the raw capabilities of the device. In terms of that tuning, SR35 has a little bit more of a smoothness to it, a little more warmth and body to the sound, where DX180 hits a little bit more crisp, a little bit more airy potentially as well. The FIO M23 kind of hits right in the middle. It's a little bit smoother, a little more body to the sound than the DX180, but not quite as rich as the SR35. So I'd sort of say, if you want that more clean, technical, crisp sound, I'd go with the DX180. If you want something more romantic, the SR35 is the way to go. But if you want maybe leans a little bit more towards reference, but with just a hint of warmth to it, that's where the M23 hits. And since there really isn't much difference in the performance with over-ear headphones or IEMs, the differences here really is going to come down to the specific features or design elements that you like, I think, more than the technical qualities of the sound. So where does that leave us? I feel like I'm doing this a lot in this video at this point, but if you put enough conditions on the situation, N3 Ultra is the clear winner to me just because of the sound and the tube mode. So if you've got that micro SD card full of music, but you like to use streaming apps occasionally as well, you'd like to have that all-in-one experience, the SR35 is a really strong option here because it's still very much player first. It's focused on that library management and playback. That could end up being a good choice here, especially considering the battery life and the small size, if those are what you're looking for. On the other hand, the small size, the small screen, if you've got bigger hands, you might have a hard time with the screen. You might just want something that's bigger, it's got more features, and again, it can still do all the other stuff you need to do with your regular music collection. The M23 is a solid pick there, and along with that, M23 and the DX180 are both really strong as just general music streaming devices. M23 is going to edge it out on features, but I think the DX180 is still the bang for your buck champion here. The level of sound quality, the features, the whole package that you're getting for the price makes that, I think, the bang for your buck contender. Sorry, I told you I was going to tell you what the best digital audio player was. And basically I told you figure it out for yourself. Be sure to let us know in the comments what your favorite digital audio player under $1,000 is. We're going to be back with part 2 with some higher end players. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe because we'll be back soon with more high fidelity audio content.